Hello everyone, welcome to 10 times better to learn English. Hello everyone, hope you all are doing well. This is the second video about English presentation. As I explained before in my previous video, that presentation in English generally have three parts. First, introduction. Second, the body or main points of presentation. Third, closing or conclusion. In this video, I just explain about the body of the presentation and the conclusion. In presentation, how to structure and organize your information is important. If you don't structure your presentation clearly, the audience won't pay attention. So, how can we do this? Use signposting language. What is signposting language? Signposting languages are used to help guide the audience through a presentation. It means using words and phrases to show the audience where your point begins and ends, to show what's coming next, or summarizing a point and to remind them about things that you talked about before. You can use signposting language to start a topic. For example, let's start with blah blah blah. So let me first give you a brief overview. Let's start by looking at blah blah blah. To begin, I would like to share with you blah blah blah, and then I would like to start with blah blah blah. Next, you can also use signposting language to move on to the next point. For example, this leads directly to my next point. Let me move on to or turn to blah blah blah. Next, let's now take a look at blah blah blah. Or, okay, let me now turn to the issues of blah blah blah. Next, now I would like to turn to blah blah blah. Or, I will move on to the next point, which is blah blah blah. The last, now let's move on blah blah blah. Next, you can also use signposting language to summarize a point. For example, before I move on, I would like to recap the main points. Next, let me brief summarize the main issues. Or, I would like to summarize what I have said so far, blah blah blah. And then, you can use signposting language to going back or referring back to the previous explanation. For example, as I said or mentioned earlier, blah blah blah. Let me come back to what I said before, blah blah blah. Let's go back to what we were discussing earlier. Or, as I have already explained, blah blah blah. Next, as I pointed out in the first section, blah blah blah. The last, can I now go back to the questions I posed at the beginning? Okay, next, move on. Signposting languages are also used when you are going to explain or add your ideas in your presentation. For example, in addition to this, I would like to say that blah blah blah. Or, moreover, or furthermore, there are other interesting facts we should take a look at. Next, you can use signposting language to indicate the end of the section. For example, this brings me to the end of my first point, so much for point 2. Or, so that's the background on blah blah blah. The last, that's all I wanted to say about blah blah. Next, describing visuals. Sometimes in your presentation you provide a figure, chart, or graph. To introduce your visual, you can use this following expression. For example, first, let's now look at the next slide which shows blah blah blah. Now, let's look at or let's have a look at or take a look at or I would like to look at blah blah blah. Or, to illustrate this, let's have a closer look at blah blah blah. Next, the chart on the following slide shows blah blah blah. The problem is illustrated in the next board chart, blah blah blah. Or, as you can see here, blah blah blah. And then the last, this graph or chart illustrates blah blah blah. And next, to explain a visual, you can use this following expression. For example, first, let me quickly explain the graph. As the graph or table shows or indicates blah blah blah, I would like to ask to focus our attention on the significance of this figure here, blah blah blah. Next, from table 1, we can see or conclude or show or estimate or calculate or infer that blah blah blah. Next, the chart compares blah blah blah, and then the last, you can see here the development over the past 5 years. And then next, the English phrases or expression used in conclusion. To indicate the end of your presentation, you can use this following expression, like, I'm now approaching or nearing the end of my presentation. Well, this brings me to the end of my presentation or talk. Or, that covers just about everything I wanted to say about blah blah blah. Next, as a final point, I would like to blah blah blah. And next, finally, I would like to highlight one key issue. And then the next, that completes my presentation. Next, there are some great examples to summarize points. To conclude or in conclusion, I would like to blah blah blah. Or in short or in a word or in brief or to sum up or to summarize, it is generally or widely accepted or argued or held or believed that blah blah blah. I will briefly summarize the main issues. Next, therefore, thus, or on this basis, or given this, it can be concluded or inferred that blah blah blah. The last, from the table or figure or data or results or information, it can be seen or concluded or shown or estimated or calculated that blah blah blah. In the conclusion, you can also make recommendations. For example, we would suggest blah blah blah, or we therefore strongly recommend that blah blah blah, or in my opinion we should blah blah blah, or based on the figure we have, I'm quite certain that blah blah blah. And the next, you can also invite questions. You can use this following expression, are there any questions? Or if you have any questions, I'll be pleased to answer them. Next, we just have time for a few questions. And then next, and now I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. And then the last, you close your presentation, like, thank you for your attention, or before I stop or finish, let me just say blah blah blah. Thank you for listening. I hope you will have gained an insight into blah blah blah. The last, unless anyone has anything else to add, I think that's it. Thanks for coming. And then the last one is dealing with questions. There are some English phrases or expressions used to respond to good questions. For example, good point, or I'm glad you asked that or brought that up, or that's actually a question I frequently get asked. Next, that's interesting. And then another expression to clarifying questions. Next, there are some expressions to clarify questions. I'm afraid I didn't quite catch that. I'm sorry, could you repeat your questions, please? I'm sorry, but I missed that. Could you say that again, please? I'm sorry, but I don't quite follow or understand or see what you mean. Could you just explain that some more, please? Next, so, if I understand you correctly, you would like to know whether blah blah blah, or if I could just rephrase your question, you would like to know blah blah blah. Last, let me just check that I have understood your question. You are asking blah blah blah. There are some expressions to check whether the questioner is satisfied. Does that answer your question? Or is that clear? Or is that okay now? Or can we go on? Next, is that the kind of information you were looking for? And then next, other expression to admit you don't know the answer. You can say, I'm afraid I'm not in a position to answer that question at the moment. Or, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to your question, but I will try to find out for you. Next, sorry, that's not my fault, but I'm sure it is followed by the name, and then could answer your questions. Or, I'm afraid I don't have that information with me. Next, to postpone questions. If you don't mind, I will deal with or come back to this point later in my presentation. Or can we get back to this point a bit later? Or would you mind waiting until the question and answer session at the end? Next, perhaps we could go over this after the presentation. And next, I would prefer to answer your question in the course of my presentation. And then the last, closing discussion time. You can use this following expression like, I think we have time for more questions, blah blah blah. Or, if there are no other questions, I will finish there. Thank you very much. And then the last, so if there are no further questions, I guess blah blah blah. That's all for this video. Thank you for watching and see you!